The 2025 Apple Cup is upon us. Washington's out for revenge. It's time for some keys to the game.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward, Mazda, Move and Be Moved. Just a quick reminder for all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. Make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well. So when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Now, Lars, we love these Friday shows. We love giving our keys to the game later on. The everydayers know what it means. Bold predictions, your always accurate score prediction. Defensive keys come in a little bit, but as always, we start on the offensive side of the ball. And as we look at this matchup between a Big Ten team and a, kind of Power 4, kind of G5 school in Wazoo, what is your number one key to a Washington win in the Apple Cup?
Yeah, one could argue bordering on an FCS team here. With that being said, I think this game, it's going to come naturally to Washington one way or another. Just let Dezmen get in rhythm. I think, this is his, season to emerge as the face of the program. This is his first legitimate Apple Cup. If you think about last season, it was the Oregon game when he really got his first start. That would have traditionally been the Apple Cup in years prior, but now it's down against in September. I think this would be a good time for Dezmen. Get in rhythm. I could see 11 at 12, 12 at 15, those sorts of things. Just get him in rhythm, get the offense going. Just kind of really let Dezmen lead this team.
So I love where you're going with that because that's what I had to start us off here too. When we look at this Wazoo pass defense through the first couple of weeks, it's been solid when you just look at the numbers. They're averaging 137.7 yards per game through the air. I know that's, somewhat skewed with so many short fields against North Texas last week, 4.9 yards per attempt, and the defensive line has 4 sacks through the first 3 games. So it's not necessarily terrible, but it's not necessarily elite either, especially considering a 59-10 loss last week. And I like where you're going there because we've talked a lot this week about Washington establishing itself physically with a tremendous offensive line, a run game headed up by arguably the best running back in the country right now in Jonah Coleman. And I love all that. And I think that's all, certainly going to be stuff that we're going to talk about throughout the course of the show. But when I look at what I want to see Dezmen do as Jedd vies for his first road win, it does start with him because if you can get him in rhythm, again, something else we've talked about this week, assuming Raiden Vines-Bright and Dezmen Roebuck are 2 of the 3 starters at wide receiver, getting those guys involved quickly and easily and just helping everyone just calm their nerves down on the road a little bit in what's certainly going to be a hostile environment. If you're able to do some of those things early on in the game, it just helps settle everybody in. And then all of a sudden, as the game goes on, you're still going to have plenty of opportunities to establish yourself as a Big Ten, just physical rushing attack as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you highlighted the 2 freshmen in Raiden and Dezmen because those are 2 guys where that's part of getting Dezmen and saying, let kind of the guys that are going to be the future of the program, the guys that you really need to carry the water this weekend in a sense, get comfortable early because if you're talking about we haven't really seen it from Dezmen in terms of him getting cold feet. Raiden is, at least in practice, there were some times where hey, kind of a little bit of a roller coaster in the season so far. It's been pretty good. Let him continue to take the next step in his game. And I think once those guys get confident, then you're talking about you still have Denzel, you still have Decker, you still have Jonah, you have Kevin. You go down the list of options that this team has at wide receiver and, the receiving options in general. That's, I think, where this shines brightest because no matter where you slice it, the other key being established well with the freshman on the offensive line, that kind of just, the old cliche, whichever team wins the trenches wins the day. John Mills has been his first Apple Cup, potentially Champ Talia, getting some chances in his first Apple Cup behind Garen Hatchett at right guard. In his likely last Apple Cup as a former and now current, again, offensive lineman. Those are 2 guys in that same breath where I look at it and think, allow those guys to kind of establish that physical play early on. Give Jonah some big holes to run through, really get in sync. And I think from there, once you grab hold of this game, whether it's in the first quarter or second quarter, which are 35, whatever, 25, whatever, that's when you can start to see, okay, now where does Jedd go from here? Because that's where it becomes interesting.
So I see where you're going with that. When I look at it, one name that you left out of the receiver core through I know through no purposeful reason is Omari Evans, and I think that's one more guy that just certainly needs to be called out here and thrown into this mix, because in his first game as a Husky, that's something that I think is really, really important for just the future of this offense this season, because having a guy like that, who I know we said the same things so far, because we just haven't had a chance to see him so far, outside of a couple of practices in the fall and, everything he was doing early on in the spring as well, is what he can bring as a field stretching element and how Jedd Fisch might want to use him and where. Is he going to line up in the slot? Is he going to line up at the Z? Is it going to be a mix of both, like we've seen so many successful Fisch receivers do throughout the years? So that's something that I'm really curious to see what that might look like, because that's someone who, no matter where he is on the field, obviously you have to respect his ability to take the top off of the defense. And whether it is just, clearing stuff out for a Dezmen or a Raiden, or it is, hey, we want to get this guy involved. We want to get the ball in his hands and see what he can do for us. So come Ohio State week, there are different things on film, whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot to think about there. But then when you talk about the offensive line and you talk about Jonah Coleman, there is so much here too that I think is just what Washington wants to establish physically, where it's not even just, thinking a week down the road to Ohio State. It's thinking to the rest of this Big Ten schedule and looking at what everything this Husky team wants to do this season, as we fully expect them to continue taking this step forward. And it's, I won't spoil one of my bold predictions. All the everydayers have to stay tuned for that later on. But as I look at it, if they, like, one thing that we've both been really impressed by in these first two games is Washington's ability to run a true balanced offense. I got to hit this coach speak buzzer whenever I say stuff like that, but this is, yeah, exactly. We need a sound effect for that or something. But truly, as I look at it, if Washington winds up being within, let's just say 3 plays of a true 50-50 set of pass versus run, I'm not going to be shocked. And that's one thing that I really do love about this offense, because we haven't seen a ton of it so far. And I think we might see more as we get into Big Ten play. And I think there's a good reason for that. And it is just putting stuff on film. We haven't seen a lot of play action, in my opinion. I'm sure, somebody's got some numbers on that, but I feel like you haven't needed to show a ton of that early on. And maybe you showed it a few different points in this game, but I look at what play action can do to open up this offense. Maybe we see a little more of it in this game, but moving forward, I think that's something where if you're able to continue running a true balanced offense, that's something that not only Jedd Fisch wants, but it would be so helpful for you long-term.
All those are great points. Just as you were saying that, I think the reason almost is kind of semi-obvious, where you don't need to go on play action because the run has been so effective with Jonah or Adam Muhammad or Jordan Washington. So I think you don't have to risk Dezmen taking an unnecessary shot, where in those play action sets and, potentially when you talk about second, third quarter game, why risk it? Why take that deep shot when you can really have the same? It's about the concept, and I get that, and showing it on film, but it's also, there's an element of, I would assume, protecting Dezmen that they haven't done on the time level.
But it's not necessarily just taking a deep shot when you talk about play action. It's about it's the slide concept that we've seen them run a couple of times, where different things like that, I think, are really what gets this offense working, because that one in particular, I see what you're saying when it comes to Dezmen taking an unnecessary hit, but that play in particular is something we've seen them run a couple of times through the first 2 weeks. And I think moving forward is going to just be a bigger part of this offense, because it's just something where it either, whoever it be, Raiden Vines-Bright, I think Omari Evans is going to be really useful in that department too. Whoever it is, just running with Dezmen, and he has that ability to just flip them the ball and let them run depending on, what you're isolating this defender and what you want them to do. It just opens up so much in the pass or the run game with something like that. So that's just one of those plays that I'm really curious to see what it looks like moving forward. But Lars, with that being said, let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball. Right after a message from our friends over at Mazda. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward, for those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. For me, this week's moment of the game that moved the game forward was Denzel Boston's punt return just before the half against UC Davis. That was such a spectacular play, and it just opens up so much for Washington's offense and defense when you're getting big-time plays on special teams like that. Plus, for a guy like Denzel, he's looking to improve his draft stock and showing the shiftiness, the long speed in the open field like that. You love to see it. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Wayfair. The weather's cooling down, the days are getting shorter, and that has me wanting to make my home feel even cozier. And when it comes to cozifying your space this fall, Wayfair is the place to go. Wayfair has everything you need to set the mood for the season, whether it's comfy recliners, warm bedding, autumn decor, or even an espresso machine, so you can make your favorite latte at home. One of the best things is the variety. Wayfair has options for every style and budget, so you don't have to compromise. And the delivery is fast, free, and hassle-free, which makes a huge difference when you're refreshing your home. Cozify your space with Wayfair's curated collection of easy, affordable fall updates, from comfy recliners to cozy bedding and autumn decor. You'll find it all for way less at wayfair.com. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So, Lars, as we look at the defensive side of the ball, it all starts in the trenches this week.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you talk about the trenches, that's why you beefed up this defensive line in the dress report with Tai Uengale and Terry Thompson, Simone Pepper. Now you have Logan Sagapalo, as you mentioned a couple of times this week, coming back from injury, not a severe injury, but just again, anytime you can get more beef, no pun intended, in the heart of your defense against really a Wazoo offense that, I mean, we talked about it kind of on yesterday's show. What do they do better, run the ball or throw it? I mean, neither. But like if worse comes to worse, you're talking about Jimmy Rogers' style of offense would be to run the ball, not necessarily Jimmy Lake, and certainly not to Wazoo's caliber or to UW's caliber with Jonah and Adam. But that's kind of why it's so important to have those guys back. To really, you're looking to control that line of scrimmage early. Do not let them continue to extend drives on those first three possessions, because if you're able to keep Wazoo in the game and Jimmy Rogers has a 10-play, 12-play, 13-play drive in the first three series, that's kind of how Wazoo hangs around this game, and that's how you're not able to pull away.
So, and that's something that came up last year too, where we talked about it this week in terms of, penalties and different things like that as well, and making sure you stay disciplined, but eliminating those long drives and establishing your physicality on the ground. And like you said, Logan Sagapolo, Deshaun Lynch are going to be big parts of that. But I go back to it, and something I wrote about over on Huskies Wire as well, and we discussed it earlier this week, when Zach Durfee was talking about the anger and the pain that he feels from last year's game, and what he called a gross feeling, like channeling that a little bit and helping you further establish your physicality that way, where we've talked about it a lot. You mentioned it right off the top, that this roster is comprised of a lot of guys who don't necessarily have the size just yet to hang at the Big Ten level. So if you're able to overwhelm Wazoo physically, that is something where, again, this is an offense that's not rushing for 70 yards a game this season. They're at 68.6. Like, you have plenty of opportunities to take advantage of this team on the ground, or just if they're going to try to run the ball, is probably the best way to say it. You have so many opportunities to force them into 2nd and 9, 3rd and 8, just different 3rd and long situations where you're able to fully let your pass rush take advantage. And as Ryan Walters has said through the first couple of weeks, he's happy with what the pass rush has provided in terms of getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And this could be a game where that shows up again.
And much like last year's game, Zevi Eckhouse is not Johnny Mateer. And John Mateer kind of proved, hey, if you give me an opening, I can take it. But Zevi Eckhouse can run, as we've talked about this week. So if he ends up being the quarterback of choice for Wazoo, that's kind of another element within this, where separate from controlling that line of scrimmage, it's make sure when Zevi tries to extend the play or the play breaks down, that's not where the hole comes into play, which has kind of gotten, that's where Washington's gotten bit at times, certainly last season and even in years prior. Making sure that you don't necessarily need to spy on Zevi Eckhouse, but kind of just making sure that either Alex McLaughlin or Sean Clark, pick whoever you want to in that role, ends up kind of just making sure that if Zevi and or the running backs get outside, you're only talking about a minimal gain at best.
No, exactly. That's what it is. And one thing that comes down to, and somebody else that you wrote about over on Huskies Wire, is Buda Alukta, where it's staying disciplined. It's just staying in your lanes and fitting runs, where that was the biggest problem in the first quarter, especially against Colorado State, where you just weren't doing that. You were overcommitting against stuff that that they hadn't shown on film, which I don't think is something that's going to be a huge problem this week. But I look at what this defense is going to bring to the table in terms of the linebackers and the safeties that are going to be asked to come downhill and fit in run support. And I think that that's just something that can show up in this game, where I don't want to say it's make or break, because I feel like the defensive line can do enough to just not let it get to this level. But if the defensive line can play the way that we expect them to, with the physicality that we expect them to in this contest, it's going to be these linebackers and safeties coming through and finishing off these plays sometimes and making plays in space. So I feel like there's a lot that is going to just start on the ground with this, because if this front four, front five, however many Ryan Walters wants to send, can just get pressure and get in the backfield like we've seen through the first couple of weeks, that can just really alter this game plan.
I mean, I think almost in a way that is kind of the game plan, where you're like, I just can't. I keep trying to wrap my head around, Wazoo, that you got to give them, like, what's their game plan? Like, how are you going to win this game if you're Wazoo? And I just say, well, Ryan Walters has a solution for every problem. And that's, I think, what's kind of the beauty of this team. Letting that versatility that we've kind of talked about over the first couple of games of the season with, guys that are also backups and future guys in the program. I think it was Dylan Robinson, for example. Let some of the young guys, and this is why you talk about establishing your will first. So then when you get that lead, allow the Riley Allens of the world. I don't think Xavier is going to play, but just, some of those younger guys, the opportunity to say, hey, Devin Hyde, you got your first sack. Maybe you want to make it 2 in the Apple Cup?
Sure. No, I like where you're going with that. It just, spurned something that we certainly need to mention that Jedd Fisch brought up during his Thursday press conference. And it was not ruling out the possibility of Jacob Manu playing in this game, which adding a just senior linebacker like that, who, go back and look at his 2023 stats in his last full season and what that looked like. Adding a dude like that to the front seven is so, so important. And it just adds so much, where I think Devin Bryan has been solid this year so far. And, I just mean this with no disrespect to anybody else in that room, but Jacob Manu just takes this group to another level, because he just has so much experience under his belt. And we've seen him, especially when you go back and again, watch some of that 2023 film, the way he comes down and just attacks in run support, despite, being a little bit undersized at like 5'9", 5'10", he's still like good 220, 230, and just really does just not allow offensive linemen to overwhelm him, which is a lot of fun to watch. But it's also just something that, as we get into Big Ten play, if he does play in this game, I feel like it signals that he's not going to redshirt. And because, all of a sudden you're going to want that guy next weekend. And then all of a sudden you look down the line at all these other games, obviously Ohio State next week, Illinois, Michigan, Oregon, all these other big games that you have this season. Those are all games that you're going to want an experienced physical senior linebacker to play in. So I think that if you're able to just kind of ramp him up this week, that's a really nice start. But before I move on here, we also need to talk about the secondary, because you mentioned guys like Alex McLaughlin, Rashawn Clark. You need to see this group get a couple of turnovers this week. And obviously it's not just on them. It is on the defensive line, the linebackers, because there's more than one way to create a turnover. But if you're able to overwhelm on the ground the way that this unit definitely can, in these 3rd and 8 scenarios, whatever it might be, when the pass rush is pinning its ears back, you need to find a way to take a little bit more of a risk and make plays on the ball. Because as you head into Big Ten play, all of a sudden, I feel like just the fan base as a whole feels a lot more confident in this defense. And I think it's been solid. If, let's say, to somewhat spoil a bold prediction, let's say they get 2 more turnovers in this game and they have 4 in their first 3 games instead of, let's say they don't get 1 and they have 2. You just feel a lot better about where that group is heading and what it looks like going forward.
And because of the talent you have in that room, with or without the guys at the starting position, like Leroy is the guy that I consider the guy that could make his first interception this season. You look at Rashawn Clark, a guy that we fully expected to kind of dominate that nickel position. Whether you're talking about Takari and Ephesians, who, by the way, in 2023, I want to say they both had an interception against Wazoo in that game in Pullman. So they've shown they can do it. Now, whether or not they both show it this weekend, various factors remain to be seen. But we're talking about multiple turnovers by the secondary that Jedd Fisch has coached in Pullman. Like, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So maybe Rashawn and Ephesians, that doesn't rhyme, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I do know what you're saying. And that's one other thing that I think we should mention is that Jedd Fisch did say during his Thursday press conference that Tacario Davis' status is still up in the air. The good news is he's traveling with the team to Pullman. I know we've seen a lot of everydayers saying, hey, rest him for Ohio State. I just from, everything that I've been able to gather from this, I feel like he's going to play against Ohio State. There's no question about that. The question is if and how much he might play this week. And because I feel like, no matter what, it's a good enough test to have him play a little bit in this game so he doesn't, go 3 weeks and then all of a sudden, hey, go guard Jeremiah Smith. That's just not good for anybody. So curious to see how it works out. I feel like he might play a little bit, but just something to keep an eye on. And I don't think that's a bold prediction, but let's get to him. Right after a message from our friends over at Square, because this episode is brought to you by Square. Your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel welcome, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. And one of the best things is when you're supporting your community, spending money there at these local businesses, it doesn't just support them, it supports the people behind it and the community around it. Those local spots are what make the neighborhoods feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockdowncollege to learn more, but before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. We've also got a message from our good friends over at DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you ordered, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Washington, Jonah Coleman delivered in a big way. This guy's just been tremendous this season. Almost 300 rushing yards through 2 games, 7 touchdowns. When the pressure was on, he came through. No hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching week after week, this performance wasn't a fluke. Jonah is on a streak. And just like Jonah delivered for the Huskies, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. This is a record for me. This is 3 straight weeks that I remember who's supposed to go first. Lars, the floor is yours.
Wow. I mean, what amount of probably you. Maybe this is a sign that 3 weeks in a row, my score prediction will be somewhat accurate.
Hey, I've hit like 4 bold predictions in the first couple of games, so I'm feeling really good about this.
I do. I say you're on a heater, sir. But with that being said, I think another, in that same breath, thing that will continue my bold prediction will be Washington will be the only Big Ten team to still have fewer than 200 rushing yards allowed, because the number will go down again. 56 rushing yards for Wazir that UW is going to hold them to.
Okay.
I do have them getting 1 rushing touchdown because it's going to be the only, significant play of the game. Let's call it that.
Spoiler alert. Whoa.
No, not totally. But with that being said, I think that would be kind of a benchmark where they're averaging about 3.1 to 3.17 yards allowed. So I think keeping that number at 3 really does kind of seem to be Jedd's theme of, hey, 3 yards, 3 wins. Here we come, Ohio State.
Okay, so I didn't know you wanted to start on the defensive side, but that is totally fine by me. I have 1 defensive one, and I like where you're going because 2 of my 3 bold predictions this week are team predictions, which I feel like is very unusual for this segment for us. So when I start on the defensive side, I think big plays, because that's what Ryan Walters wants. That's what this team wants. And this is, again, we talked about it on yesterday's show. You want to make sure that you can just leave no doubt after that loss last year. So I have Washington coming out of this game with 4 sacks and 2+ turnovers. I think that this is one of those things where I didn't want to, put it behind any particular player, partially to save my own streak here. But I look at this and I say that this is, again, an opportunity that Washington has to assert itself physically. And going into this matchup with Ohio State, you are going to have every opportunity to do that and use this game as a launching pad into Big Ten play that I think is really, really important, because if you're going into this game 3-0, riding high off of, I'm not going to touch your score prediction there, however many score win over your rival, let's say, and the defense is also playing really well, hey, all of a sudden I feel like people are feeling really good about that game.
I agree with that. I mean, I think no matter what, you have fans are going to be pretty good about the game, feel pretty good about the game either way. But I think when you look at what else needs to happen in this game, guys need to continue to produce. The younger guys, the next wave, the Adam Muhammad, the Raiden Vines-Bright, then Dezmen Roebuck, all three guys get a touchdown in the game.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay.
And so again, I had to leave. Defense travels, offense carries the water and wins the game because we know Jedd Fisch as an offensive-minded coach certainly will be wanting to talk about the offense at the end of the game. And I think when you look at those three guys, Adam didn't get a rushing touchdown last season to somehow, I don't know how he pulled it off because it really seemed like he should have had at least 4 or 5. This season, correct me if I'm wrong, he's had at least 1 in every game.
That's right.
That streak continues. I do not know what the streak Myles Gaskin had, but I do believe it was somewhat similar. And I think Adam Muhammad getting his, maybe he has a 2-touchdown game. I don't want to necessarily add this parlay into it, but I do think all 3 of those guys will have a touchdown at the end of the game. Adams will be rushing, Raiden and Dezmen will be receiving.
So we can just pair that in with one of mine. I also had Raiden Vines-Bright getting his first career touchdown in this game. This is something where there are a lot of different ways that we could take this. You and I just love choosing the young guys to get their first career touchdown because it is an awesome moment. And I think that plays into it for both of us. Obviously, Dezmen got his last week against 2 weeks ago, against UC Davis. But when I just kind of look at what Raiden Vines-Bright brings to the table, he's been so impressive through the early part of the season. And I don't want to say it's time for Demond Williams to reward him because it's his 3rd career game. It's not like it's anything even close to that, but he's just one of those guys where he just brings so much juice to this offense. And to quote Jedd Fisch, when asked why Raiden earned the starting job, it was because every time the ball's in his hands and he had an opportunity to make a play, he made it. And I feel like this is such an awesome stage for him to score that first touchdown and just establish himself as a part of this rivalry. And I think it's just going to be a lot of fun, to be honest with you.
I mean, all great notes because at the end of the day, this is a game that Washington chooses how to win, not figures out how to win. This is a game where DeMond could have 5 passing touchdowns. He could have 2 because the running backs had 7 combined rushing touchdowns. And I think there's so many different ways that you can go about this. For me, I think the one thing that matters kind of tried and true through all of this, score on every possession. Find a way.
A perfect game yet again.
Now, again, I do think that also includes, and this is kind of a kicker here, Grady and Ethan both make their field goals in this game. So I think exactly. Yeah. And so I think in that respect, because I think there's something to be said for that element of having 2 different types of kickers where Grady seems to be the, what do you want to say, 45 and in, call it 50 and in, but I'm more confident. Yeah. 50 and in, but there's an element to Ethan where, I wanted to go with a different one, so I might sprinkle this one in right before my score prediction, but I want to go with that one because I think there's going to be a special team score or 2 this weekend.
Or 2. All right, that's a little bold for me, but I like where you're going with that. I respect where your head's at in this game. For me, my 3rd and final bold prediction is something that I don't think we've done for a long time here on this show, and it's an offensive line prediction. I think that Washington as a team will rush for more than 250 yards in this game, plus the offensive line isn't going to give up a sack. I think that with how well this unit has played through the first couple of weeks, we're going to see that on the ground. We talked about it on the show the other day where Washington's offensive line has an average advantage of 36 pounds on this Wazoo defensive line. And I think, that's a well-coached group. Jimmy Rogers, as you've highlighted several times, certainly knows what he's doing on the defensive side of the ball. But I think it's something that we saw happen to Washington several times last year is they just weren't big enough. And I feel like we've certainly ingrained ourselves into the Big Ten now with saying stuff like this, right? But as I look at what Washington can do in a matchup like this, Jedd Fisch is going to want to assert himself and his team's will on the ground. And on top of that, with what Demond Williams can do in the backfield, plus how this offensive line, again, has performed as a unit through the first couple of weeks, where even you go back and you look at the 3 sacks that were allowed against Colorado State, none of them were directly attributed to the offensive line. So this is one of those games where unless Wazoo wants to, send 6 like Colorado State did and blitz on 70% of DeMond's dropbacks, like what happened in that game, I feel like it's going to wind up being pretty clean in the backfield for DeMond.
I like where your head's at there. The interesting thing for me was, and I'm going to kind of tie in my, +1 bold prediction, if you will. First play call of the game on offense. Speed option.
No, not the first play call. Not the first play call.
I'm just saying it has to be just for the symbolic need. Get it out of the way. And it's like you're doing a speed option probably from the 25, 30 yard line at that point. Like, I mean, because here's the thing. You have Raiden and Dezmen, who are both showing they can stretch the field. You can get creative with that play call as well. We know Jedd wants to make a statement in this game. Why not have some fun with it?
I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying that's not where it's going to happen. Where I'm sure there are people that are yelling at us for saying this, but we've also gotten questions about this. We've gotten several questions about when and if this play is going to show up. And it's going to happen inside the red zone, man. Like that's where we're going to see this. And, you run it to Quentin Moore's side of the field with a mobile quarterback in Demond Williams plus Jonah. Like that's if it happens, that's where it's going to happen, in my opinion. I do like where you're going with that, though. I'd set the over under for times we see the play in this game. One of our phenomenal everydayers, Sir Theodore Francis Windsor, had it in our comment section the other day. The over under is at 1.5 for how many times we'll see this play. I'd take the under, but I still think we see it.
I'm going to take the over just for the simple fact of the Jedd Fisch laugh at his press conference when he's like, the one thing that sticks in, there was a one thing, and it was kind of, I have a right to wrong there. And with that being said, Jedd does right the wrong this weekend. UW does end the streak that doesn't really begin. 52-10.
As I've been messing around with StreamYard and everything, I had a drum roll queued up for you this time.
Well, that was a false start. You know what? That'll be the first play of the game. They have a false start, and then they go perfect the rest of the way. But no, I do think this ends up being a smooth sailing win for UW. Thank you for the drum roll, though. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, hey, yeah, of course.
We will work on that moving forward, but I do appreciate the addition there because I think this is a game where it reminds me a lot of Boise State 23, I think I want to say 22, 23 against UW, where win handily. I know that was at home. But make Martin Stadium your home. There's, they have beer in the stands now, but I mean, it's not the same. It's just really not.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. That's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you got any questions, comments, concerns, I'm right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you after the game.